Chapter 6 Cravings and Sibling Rivalry. The tavern fell silent, save for the occasional plink of peachberry juice dripping from the rafters. Then old Grack snorted into his ale, shoulders shaking with suppressed laughter. "Well," he rasped, wiping tears from his yellow eye, "at least he didn't strangle Leech like last time." Upstairs, Twit's claws shredded the straw-filled mattress with each furious twist of his body. The scent of fermented peachberries clung to his scales like a curse, mingling unpleasantly with the herbal poultice he'd smeared across his burning eyelids. His tail lashed against the bedframe. Thwack, 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 until the wood groaned in protest. Somewhere below, Leech's laughter still drifted through the floorboards, sharp as a Skeksis dagger between his ribs. Twit's claws dug into the wooden beam above his bed. His swollen eyes narrowed to slits as he listened to Leech's mocking laughter drift up from the tavern below. The peachberry juice still burned like liquid fire in his tear ducts, but the pain had crystallized into something sharper. A plan. His tail twitched in anticipation as he reached beneath the straw mattress, fingers closing around the broom, and snarled, "Oh, I have some payback in store for you, Leech." The broom handle cracked ominously as Twit snapped it over his knee, revealing the hollow interior and the stolen vial of Skektek's experimental itching elixir he'd hidden inside 5 trine ago. The label had faded, but the memory of its effects hadn't. 3 drops had left Skektek scratching his own scales off for a week. Twit's lips peeled back in a feral grin as he crept to the edge of the loft, peering down at the banquet chaos below. Leech was leaning against the ale barrel now. Her frills flared triumphantly as she regaled Thera with exaggerated retellings of Twit's humiliation. Perfect. Twit's claws trembled with suppressed glee as he angled the vial over the railing. The liquid caught the firelight, a deceptively pretty violet shimmer, before plummeting in a perfect arc. It landed with a soft plip directly into Leech's half-empty mug, just as she raised it for another swig. For 3 agonizing seconds, nothing happened. Then, Leech's frills stiffened. Her copper scales rippled. Her left eye twitched violently. Leech's mug hit the floor with a ceramic crack as her claws flew to her neck, scratching furiously at scales that suddenly burned like 1,000 fire mites boring beneath her skin. Her frills flared wide, not in triumph now, but in horrified realization as the itching spread up her spine in crawling waves. What in Thraz?" she managed, before her words dissolved into frantic scraping, her claws raking bloody lines across her copper hide. The banquet crowd froze mid-bite nebry ribs dangling forgotten from slack jaws. Twit's laughter erupted from the loft like a rock slide, rich and unhinged. He clutched his aching ribs as tears, actual tears, not peachberry-induced, streamed down his muzzle. "How does it feel, cousin?" he howled, tail lashing against the railing. Below, Leech was now rolling across the ale-slick floorboards like a skittering cave lizard, her shrieks punctuated by the wet thwack of her tail smacking into table legs. The crowd erupted into laughter. "The old itching elixir trick," old Grax said in amusement, "never fails." Leech's claws raked bloody furrows across her own copper scales. As the itching powder worked its magic. "You little—" she screeched, her voice cracking as she lunged toward the staircase, only to collapse mid-step, twitching like a fish stranded on dry land. Thera sighed, rubbing her temples, as she nudged Leech's writhing form with a foot. "You brought this on yourself," she muttered, though her frills twitched with suppressed amusement. The vial's empty shell clattered against the floorboards as Twit dangled it over the railing like a trophy. "Remember the time when I told you about my escape from the castle?" he called down, shaking the glass so it caught the firelight. "This was from Skektek's supply closet, and so was Skekvile's signet ring, Leech." His tail flicked with smug satisfaction. 5 trine ago, that little bottle had been tucked between Skektek's vials of spinal extract and a jar labeled Gelfling Eyelash Curlers, Experimental. The secret tunnel which Twit had used as his escape route had taken him straight through the Skeksis' private stores, and he'd grab anything small enough to pocket. Old Grax's wheezing laughter turned into a cough as he slapped the table. "By the first spore!" he managed, wiping ale from his muzzle. "You kept that all this time?" His yellow eye gleamed with something perilously close to pride as he continued to laugh. "I thought you just stole Skekvile's signet ring and ran. Now that is funny!" The tavern's laughter faded into contented murmurs as the last remnants of the food fights were swept aside, both metaphorically and literally, judging by the broom-wielding Gelfling maid scowling at the honey-smeared floorboards. Leech had been dragged outside to roll in the moss patches until the itching subsided, her curses muffled by the thick foliage. Twit, now comfortably perched on a stool with a cold compress over his eyes, was picking at a plate of roasted tubers with the smug satisfaction of a predator who'd won the territory dispute. Then Zill moaned as he entered the tavern with Luna steadying him. He steadily walked his way to the great oak table, the weight of his belly making his steps slow and deliberate. "I need—" His voice hitched as his nostrils flared, pupils dilating at the scent of roasted tubers. "That! All of that!" His fingers twitched toward the platter, his mouth salivating uncontrollably. Celadon blinked as Zill lunged for the food with an urgency that sent platters skittering across the table. "Stars above!" she muttered, watching her cousin shovel roasted tubers into his mouth with both hands. His chewing was frantic, almost feral, bits of food clinging to his chin. The villagers exchanged glances, none of them had seen a gelfling eat like this since the great Nebri famine 3 trine prior. Twit flicked a stray tuber peel off his claw as he removed his compress, watching Zill demolish the banquet table with the single-minded focus of a starving Nebri. "It's just cravings," he muttered around a mouthful of roasted fungus, nudging old Grack with his elbow. "Very normal." The elder kobold's frills twitched as Zill lunged for a platter of honey-glazed cave carrots, nearly upending Celadon's wine goblet in the process. "Yeah," Grack rumbled, scratching his scarred muzzle. "I once saw a podling eat 2 whole barrels of fermented peachberries when she was carrying. She woke up blue as a doosan and swore off fruit for life." Luna's fingers hovered uncertainly over Zill's twitching shoulders as he demolished the 3rd platter of roasted tubers. "Zill, take it easy," she murmured, wincing as a chunk of half-chewed Nebri rib bounced off his chin onto her tunic. "You're going to get sick." Zill ignored her, his pupils blown wide as he lunged for a basket of honey-drizzled cave mushrooms, still steaming, and shoved 3 into his mouth at once. His cheeks bulged like a chipmunk's hoard. Twit snorted into his ales, tail curling around the stool leg as Zill ripped into a loaf of sourdough with his teeth. "He's having cravings," the kobold announced to the stunned banquet hall, flicking a stray crumb off his stolen Skeksis pauldron. "Very normal." Zill's chewing slowed to a stop mid-bite, a half-gnawed cave mushroom dangling from his lips as his pupils contracted to normal size. He blinked at the demolished banquet table like someone walking from a trance, grease glistening on his chin and crumbs clinging to his tunic. The sudden stillness was so profound that several villagers leaned forward, as if expecting him to collapse. Instead, he burped. "Sorry," Zill murmured sheepishly, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand, only to freeze mid-motion, staring at the grease-streaked sleeve in horror. The banquet hall held its breath as his cheeks darkened into a mortified violet. Then Luna burst into laughter, her giggles bouncing off the rafters like wind chimes. "Oh, that's what got you to stop," she managed between breaths, clutching her sides. Old Grack's iron-shod staff thumped against the floorboards as he rose, his lone yellow eye crinkling at the corners. "All right," he rumbled, nudging Zill's chair with the tip. "Time for bed, before you start gnawing on the table legs." Twit sniggered into his ale, tail twitching toward the distinct tooth marks already marring the oak where Zill had absent-mindedly nibbled during his frenzy. Then Twit got out of his seat and began to head for the exit door. The other gelflings dissolved into laughter, not mocking, but the kind that bubbles up when something ridiculous catches you off guard. A podling server dropped her tray of empty ale mugs with a clatter, too busy clutching her sides to care. Even Celadon, usually so composed, had tears sparkling at the corners of her eyes as Zill's mortified expression deepened to an eggplant shade of purple. Rian was the first to recover, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "Well," he managed between residual chuckles, "at least we know the baby's got good taste." He gestured to the demolished platters, only scraps of honey glaze and a single stubborn cave carrot remained. Suddenly, Zill's knees buckled halfway to the door. One moment he was shuffling toward the exit, with Luna's arm around his waist. The next, his stomach clenched violently. His throat convulsed in a wet, gurgling sound that made Twit's ears snap upright. The kobold barely had time to turn around before Zill's entire banquet came rushing back up in a steaming arc of half-digested tubers and nebri ribs, all of it splattering across Twit's chest with a sound like a wet sack hitting the ground. The tavern froze. Twit stood, statue still, dripping. A single chunk of cave mushroom slid slowly down his snout before plopping onto his foot. Then the whole tavern burst into laughter, except Twit. His claws curled into fists, the sound of his own bile-soaked scales squelching between clenched fingers. "Told you," Luna sing-songed to Zill, patting his back as he wiped his mouth sheepishly. "Ah! This is disgusting!" Twit screeched. Twit's dripping fists clenched tighter as Leech's laughter cut through the tavern like a rusty blade. She'd recovered from her itching powder ordeal, leaning against the ale barrel with her frills flared in that infuriating way that made his tail spines rattle. "Oh, look at you!" she cackled, pointing at the vomit-streaked kobold with a claw that trembled with mirth. "Like a newborn nebri calf after its first—" The belt came off before Twit even realized he'd moved. The worn leather uncoiled like a striking serpent through the air. Crack! The sound echoed like a whip shot across the suddenly silent tavern as the buckle connected with Leech's muzzle hard enough to send a spray of copper scales scattering across the floorboards. Then Leech lunged at him, as the tavern burst out into even more laughter, with old Grack laughing the hardest. Twit barely had time to register the pain in his own ribs before Leech's claws sank into his shoulders, her fangs flashing inches from his throat. Their combined momentum sent them crashing through a nearby table, splinters and ale mugs exploding outward in a chaotic spray. Somewhere beneath the tangled mess of limbs and shattered wood, Twit's tail found purchase around Leech's ankle, yanking hard enough to flip her onto her back with a satisfying thud. "I am sick and tired of you making fun of me," Twit snarled, his claws digging into Leech's frills as they rolled across the ale-slick floorboards. The tavern's laughter echoed around them like a swarm of mocking fireflies, but all he could hear was the blood roaring in his ears. His tail lashed out, sending a stray mug clattering into the hearth with a hiss of steam. "You've been doing it since we were hatchlings!" Leech's answering grin was all teeth and venom. "Maybe if you weren't such an easy target." Her words dissolved into a yelp as Twit headbutted her square in the snout, sending them both skidding into a support beam. The impact rattled the rafters, raining dust onto Old Grack's untouched honey cake below. Old Grack blew the dust off his honey cake with a wheezing chuckle, the crumbs settling into the deep grooves of his scarred snout. "By the first spore's fungal feet," he rasped, watching Twit and Leech roll through a puddle of spilled ale like two feral cave pups. "This is the best name day gift I've ever had in Trine." His iron-shod staff thumped against the floorboards in time with their tumbling. Thump! As Twit got Leech in a headlock. Thump! As she retaliated by biting his tail. Rian ducked as a flying wooden platter shattered against the hearthstones behind him. "Shouldn't we?" he began, only for Figlin to shove a fresh mug of ale into his hands. Figlin snarled angrily. Before anyone could react, the kobold was on his feet, emerald spines flaring like a basilisk's quills. "I'll handle this," he growled, claws scraping against the wooden tabletop as he vaulted over it. "Hey! Break it up!" His voice cracked like a whip through the tavern, cutting through the laughter and the wet smack of Twit and Leech rolling through a puddle of spilled mead. "That's enough!" Figlin's tail lashed, sending a stray bread roll flying into the hearth, where it burst into flames. "These brawls between you two are getting out of hand!" Neither sibling listened. Twit had Leech pinned against the ale barrel now, his claws digging into her frills, while her teeth gnawed on his forearm, like a cave pup with a bone. A stream of insults and half-trued threats spilled between them, punctuated by the occasional thud of a tail smacking into furniture. Figlin snarled as he took his belt off, a thick, braided cord of cave spider silk and hardened nebri hide. The buckle forged from scavenged Skeksis steel. It whistled through the air before landing with twin cracks across Twit and Leech's spines. The siblings yowled in unison, their tangled limbs finally separating as they clutched at their stinging backs. "Enough!" Figlin roared, twirling the belt like a whip. "You're acting like hatchlings fighting over scraps!" His frills flared wide, casting a jagged shadow across their cowering forms. The tavern had gone silent. Even old Grax stopped mid-sip, ale dripping unnoticed down his chin. "But she started it!" Twit growled, rubbing the fresh welt on his spine where Figlin's belt had struck. His tail lashed against the ale-splattered floorboards, sending droplets flying into the firelight. Behind him, Leech mimicked his words in a high-pitched whine. Her frills flared in triumph, even as she nursed her own matching stripe across her shoulders. Figlin's belt cracked against the floor like a Skeksis whip, silencing them both. "Twit, enough!" His frills trembled with barely contained fury. The spider silk cord coiled tight in his claws. "You're acting like hatchlings fighting over a scrap of nebri meat!" The words echoed through the suddenly silent tavern, bouncing off the rafters where a stray honey cake still clung precariously. Old Grack snatched the dangling honey cake mid-fall, shoving the entire sticky mass into his maw with a wet squelch. Crumbs tumbled down his scarred chest as he chewed, completely indifferent to the tense scene unfolding before him. He grunted, licking honey from his claws. "Waste not." The sound of his sticky lips smacking together echoed through the silent tavern. Twit stared at his father, bits of ale-soaked vomit still clinging to his scales. "That was on the floor," he said slowly, his tail twitching in horrified fascination. Old Grack licked the last of the honey from his claws with a wet slurp that made Twit's stomach lurch. "So what?" The elder kobold shrugged, his iron-shard pauldrons clanking as he reached for another fallen honey cake. "It's normal for kobolds to eat off the floor." He punctuated the statement by plucking a mud-crusted mushroom from between the floorboards and popping it into his maw with a crunch. Twit's frills flattened against his skull. Then he let out a frustrated groan. "Ugh, never mind. I'm going to take a bath." He turned on his heel, flicking droplets of vomit onto the tavern's already filthy floorboards. Leech's laughter followed him like a persistent itch between his shoulder blades. "Aw, poor Twit. Can't handle a little floor food." Her voice dripped with mock sympathy. "Did the Skeksis teach you to be dainty while you were their little pet?" Twit ignored her, shoulders hunched, as he shoved open the tavern's back door with enough force to rattle the hinges. The crisp night air hit his muzzle like a slap, clean, sharp, and mercifully free of ale stench or vomit fumes. Outside, the village well stood silhouetted against Thra's triple moons, its wooden bucket swaying gently in the breeze. Twit stalked toward it, claws digging into the soft earth with each step. He'd need at least 3 buckets to wash this stench off. Maybe 4. He yanked the rope with a snarl, sending the bucket plummeting into the darkness below. The distant plunk of water was almost soothing. Luna barely caught Zill before his knees hit the floorboards. Again. "Easy," she murmured, wrapping his arm around her shoulders as his stomach gave another ominous gurgle. His skin felt feverish beneath her fingers, radiating heat like a banked hearthstone. Celadon appeared at his other side without a word, her grip surprisingly firm despite the way her nose wrinkled at the lingering scent of vomit and roasted tubers clinging to Zill's tunic. "You're leaning too far left," Brea called from behind them, juggling a basin of water and a stack of clean linens pilfered from the tavern's storage. Zill swayed like a sapling in a storm, his free hand clutching his distended belly with a groan. "I think," he hiccuped, his throat working convulsively, "I think there's more coming up than down." Then he vomited onto the ground with a wet splatter, narrowly missing Brea's shoes. Leech chose that moment to fling the tavern door open, with a dramatic flourish. Her claws still dripping from Twit's earlier bell strike. "Oh, how delightful," she drawled, stepping gingerly around the steaming puddle. Nothing like post-dinner regurgitation to really set the mood. Her frills flared mockingly as she sidled past Zill, deliberately knocking his shoulder with her hip. "Enjoy your evening, mother." Old Grack's iron-shod staff thunked against the ale-splattered floorboards, the sound cutting through Leech's mocking laughter like a blade. "Leech," he rumbled, his lone yellow eye narrowing to a sliver of molten gold. "You're embarrassing the poor boy." The tavern's ambient chatter died instantly. No one contradicted old Grack when he used that tone. The one that smelled vaguely of wet cave moss and impending doom. Leech's frills twitched mid-snicker, her copper scales flushing moss green at the edges. What? Him?" She jabbed a claw at Zill's hunched form, currently drooling onto Luna's shoulder. "He's literally vomiting on your boots, Uncle." Old Grack's iron-shod staff thunked against the ale-splattered floorboards again, this time hard enough to send a hairline crack zigzagging toward Leech's claws. "I don't care," he growled, the words vibrating deep in his scarred chest, like stones grinding together. "Leave him alone!" The tavern's firelight guttered suddenly, casting his hunched silhouette across the wall in monstrous proportions, all jagged pauldrons and twisted horns. Even the drunkest patrons froze mid-sip, ale dripping down their chins. Leech's frills flattened against her skull so fast they made a faint whiff of displaced air. Her claws retracted with an audible snick. "But, Uncle, he's..." Leech's protest died in her throat as old Grack's iron-shod boot cracked the floorboard beside her claws. "Just quit with the nonsense," he growled, his lone eye reflecting the hearthlight like a smoldering ember, "or I'll personally tie you to a tree." The tavern's fire chose that moment to spit a spark onto Leech's shoulder, making her yelp and bat at it like a startled cave pup. The elder kobold didn't blink. "And I'll use your own belt to do it." He punctuated the threat by spitting a wad of half-chewed honey cake into the fire, where it sizzled ominously. Leech bolted like a startled nebri, her frills clamped flat against her skull, as she scrambled over the tavern's splintered benches and out the door with a yelp that trailed into the night. The silence she left behind was so thick, even the fire seemed to hold its breath. Old Grack exhaled through his nostrils, the ember glow fading from his eye as he turned toward Zill's hunched form. "Right," he grunted, thumping his staff against the cracked floorboards. "Let's get you to bed, kid. I'll fetch a bucket, just in case your evening sickness or morning sickness decides to make another grand entrance." His iron-shod boots clanked against the wood as he strode towards the storage closet, muttering about "darn fool hatchlings" and wasted honey cake.
Long oak table cracked and scarred, soup that bites and bread that's hard. Gelfling cheer